Today's Friday, March 29th, 2024. It's the day we call Good Friday, which commemorates the crucifixion of Lord Jesus Christ. And some may think it's inappropriate for me to speak about earthly relationships on this day. But there's actually a correlation between what I'm about to speak about and the Lord Jesus Christ. Yesterday I saw something in response to a video I'd posted. And when I saw it, I was a little bit shocked, in part because it was something from a different perspective that I'm used to, a different perspective than I've presented on before, at least not that I can recall. And as I inquired for the Lord regarding how I should answer, there's some things that I needed to do. And towards the end of the day, I felt inspired to do a video response to that question. And then this morning, I saw another comment. Even though it's a little bit different, there's a common theme, which is also associated with the Lord Jesus Christ, that I'm going to speak about. But a comment yesterday that I saw, and in answering this question, what if you rejected your quote-unquote kingdom spouse, but you came to your senses, but now they're no longer interested? I say again, what if you rejected your quote-unquote kingdom spouse, but you came to your senses, but now they're no longer interested? And then this was from another video that I read today. How will you know the other is ready? After you've gotten rejected, will they return? So there's a common theme between those two individuals regarding rejection and earthly relationships. And that is something Lord Jesus Christ understands very well. There's some things I may say in this video, and it may come across as such, but they're not meant to bring condemnation upon anyone. It is simply a presentation of information so that you can gather how the other person may feel, how the other person may deal, and why the other person's response is such. In reading the first question, there's some things that points to the story of the prodigal son. The coming to one's senses. But the part that individual could find hurtful is if you come to your senses about having rejected someone, is when you come around and you're willing to humble yourself, the same way the prodigal son was willing to humble himself in his father's house. Unlike the father who greeted his son and threw a festival, a feast for him, this reception was cold. Let me break this down. What if you rejected your quote-unquote kingdom spouse? And I use quotes because sometimes what people speak about kingdom spouse, it is out of hand. And a lot of times there are allegations of a person being a quote-unquote kingdom spouse. It is important to know what God said or communicated regarding another person. Because sometimes people, they receive a revelation and may have confirmations, but it may not be from the Spirit of God. So it's important to first know that God is actually trying to bring two people together. But you came to your senses. A part of why a person may not respond favorably after being rejected is if that person received a revelation from God about you, and that person truly started treating you like a kingdom spouse, quote-unquote kingdom spouse. And not that the person may have had a relationship with you, but the person may have started covering you in prayer. The person may have started experiencing warfare. The person, in a sense, may have gone through literal hell. When I say literal hell, I'm speaking about quote-unquote hell on earth here for you. And having gone through those things, the person may have been receiving revelations from the Lord, maybe to pursue you in a way that's not really overt, but to be there for you. And all these things, it was a lot of time, it was a lot of effort. And every time the person did those things and you rejected the individual, it hurt. And not only did it hurt the individual, it also hurt the individual's relationship with God. Because one of the most painful things is for a person to receive a revelation from the Lord and for the person to move forward and then it doesn't work out. In Judges chapter 20, the Lord told the Judeans to go and fight against the Benjamites in accordance with their prayer. But when they went, they lost thousands of men. They came back. They asked the Lord again, should they go? The Lord told me yes. The Israelites sent more men. They lost thousands again. And it got to the point where it's like, they asked the Lord a third time, should they go or should they forbear? But the Lord told them, go, and this time I'll give you the victory. When a person has been doing things in accordance with the Lord's will, in accordance with the Lord's instructions, if it's not well received by the other person, then not only is it impacting the individual who's been standing the gap, the individual who's been waiting, but also may impact the person's relationship with the Lord. It shouldn't destroy it, but it may impact it. And may have pushed a person to the point of truly saying, he or she does not care if it is God's will. The person no longer wants to be with the individual who rejected him or her. It is said that when it comes to relationships, that men want respect and women want love. But arguably, something both men and women want in a relationship is someone they can trust their heart with. And if the person had a revelation from the Lord, and it's truly from the Lord, about you, and the person's been doing the work, laboring in prayer, sometimes fasting, and doing all of these things, and then wasn't well received by you, then you did not become a safe place for that person's heart. Scripture speaks about guarding our heart. And even the story of Adam and Eve. The Lord presented Eve to Adam, and Satan got in the midst. Eve went along with Satan's his deception, his treachery. And then she also caused Adam to go astray. And one of the things when a person has a relationship with the Lord, the person must realize that even God's gift to him or her can be a potential liability, and a person has to guard his or her heart. And if you rejected an individual, then it speaks about your relationship with the Lord and may raise questions in that individual. For example, what is your relationship with the Lord like? If he or she heard from the Lord about you, but you didn't hear? Or what is your relationship with the Lord like if you heard from the Lord about that person, but you rejected the individual anyhow? And if there are those issues with you, then it doesn't create a safe space of that person's heart, and you become untrustworthy. Hence, the rejection in response to the rejection. I say this, if the relationship is truly of God, if it was truly ordained of him, then he will work it out. He will do what it takes. The same way if the relationship was truly of him, and eventually you're brought to a place where you're willing to accept the person who was presented to you, he can deal with the individual to encourage the individual to accept you, because now you've gone to a place where you're truly ready to be in a relationship. If it is of God, he will bring it together in his due time, which also seeps into the second person's question. It is interesting that I'm in this spot, in this room, because last year, on October 6th, the Lord said something to me 3 times. I heard, "You are Israel, you are Israel, you are Israel." Scripture speaks about the Lord, or even angels at times, that when they speak, it sounds like rivers of living waters. It's like multiple voices in one. When I heard, "You are Israel," it didn't have a sound of being multiple voices in one, but it had multiple meanings in one. When I heard, "You are Israel," every time I heard "you," a person's name was communicated to me. So I knew who the Lord was saying was like Israel. Now, I don't have the full meaning regarding what it meant, but again, this is October 6th. The record shows that on October 7th, Hamas attacked Israel. I didn't say anything to the individual. When I heard you, I know the Lord is speaking about that individual, but I didn't say anything. Time will tell what the Lord truly meant. Then a week later, or about a week later, I was in this very room, around this same spot, and I was about to pray. And I was praying to the Lord about something. And then I heard the sound of heartbreak in the Lord when he said, or let me just rephrase that. When I heard, she has rejected my son. She has rejected my son. She has rejected my son. But every time I heard those words, it also had the same double meaning. And I heard pain. I've communicated before that the greatest love I've ever felt was because the Lord allowed me to feel how he felt about someone else. That is the greatest love I've ever felt. On that day, I felt the Lord's pain. Again, there are double meanings regarding she has rejected my son. If you've ever seen your parent cry or parents cry, you know it has a different impact. When I was a preteen, I had a sister who passed away. She was a teenager. I remember when my father came home, and it was earlier in the day than he usually comes home, and he was in tears. Those tears that I saw my father crying that day was like how it was when I heard, she has rejected my son. There are times in the Bible where the Lord expressed his heartbreak. In Genesis 6, when the watchers, some of the angels, came down on earth and procreated with women, the Lord said that he regretted that he had made humans. That was a heartbreaking situation for the Lord. Also with King Saul, the Lord spoke about how he had regretted that he made Saul king. That was a heartbreaking situation for the Lord. And that's what I felt when I heard, she has rejected my son. It had a double meaning. One was a woman rejecting a man the Lord had presented to her. That hurt the Lord when the woman rejected the man the Lord had presented to her. Also pay attention to my words. I'm not even saying ordained. I'm simply saying presented. Because there's a possibility the Lord may present someone who he hasn't necessarily ordained. When I say ordained, I'm meaning he has ordained this from the foundations of the earth, and that nothing's going to stop it from coming to pass. In some cases, things may just be a presentation where the Lord gives a person a choice. In Genesis 24, the Lord gave Rebekah a choice. And we see when Abraham sent a servant to go get a wife for Isaac. And the servant was like, what if the woman is not willing to come? Abraham told him that the Lord had sent an angel to help give him success along the journey. But he even told him that if the woman is not willing to return home with him, that he be free from his oath. So there are some cases where people have a choice in the matter. Others, they don't. And when I say they don't, it doesn't mean that the Lord's going to force anyone's hands. He knows the end from the beginning. He knows what's going to happen. And yes, if a person is legitimately rejected by someone he had ordained or prepared or presented to another, he knew that was going to happen too. He knew how the rejected person was going to respond. And the same way if someone can reject a person and then come around, is the same if the other person was rejected, can also come around if it's God's will. But one of the things about something being God's will is that at the right time, he and only he would make it happen. And if a person rejected someone the Lord presented to him or her or had ordained, then one thing to work on, the person who did the initial rejection, is to work on his or her relationship with the Lord. That has to be paramount. That has to be first and foremost. Because if there was some deficiency in your relationship with the Lord that didn't cause you to see the person who was presented to you the way God sees, then you have to get so close to the Lord, you're going to start seeing things from His perspective. In 1 Samuel 16, things got to the point in verse 1 where the Lord told Samuel, "How long will you mourn over Saul, seeing I have rejected him as king?" He had chosen someone else. And I wouldn't go down that road. But with everything, seek God regarding specifics for your situation. But later in 1 Samuel 16, when the Lord sent Samuel to Jesse's house to anoint one of his sons as king, Samuel saw Eliab, Jesse's eldest, and he assumed that he was going to be the chosen one. But the Lord told him that the Lord doesn't look at a person's height or stature. The Lord looks at a person's heart. And what the one who did the rejection may have missed was a person's heart. So back to what I heard about, she has rejected my son. When I heard those words, I felt the pain in the Lord's voice regarding she has rejected my son. Because in hearing she has rejected my son, it wasn't just about a woman rejecting a man. It was also Israel rejecting Jesus. And in that moment I realized that the woman rejecting the man the Lord had presented to her is how He also views Israel rejecting His son. And it was a serious offense. It is one that requires repentance. It is one that requires humbling oneself at God's feet. So whereas people may expect that if they reject someone, they come to their senses and they want to accept that person, then the person is going to greet them with open arms. The person may be so hurt that the person has now adopted a posture that he or she has to protect himself from the one he or she may believe he or she is called to love. And it's going to require God to fix that. One of the first things a person who rejected someone God may have ordained and or presented to him or her is to fix his or her relationship with the Lord. Nothing else has to matter except the relationship with the Lord. So again, when I heard, she has rejected my son, I felt the pain, the rejection, and how when the Lord called Paul or Saul of Tarsus to serve him, and he asked him why he was persecuting him. It's like persecuting him. Saul had been persecuting Christians, members of the way, but the Lord took the persecution personally, the same way the Lord took the rejection personally. That's why if a person rejects an individual that God had ordained, presented, or whatsoever the case may be, then the first thing, the most important thing, is for that person to make his or her relationship right with the Lord. Because rejecting God's gift is rejecting the giver, who is God. Let me see with the second question here, or from the second person. How will you know the other is ready? The Lord has different ways. One of the first things the person has to be concerned with is that he or she is ready. Is that he or she has a strong relationship with the Lord. And as I cited Adam and Eve earlier, a part of being ready is to focus on you. Are you so ready that if or when God brings someone into your life, if that person starts off on a straight and narrow, and the person starts going astray, are you going to go astray with that person? Or would you be willing to cut the person off? Among the books the Lord had me write in the last several months, it's called The Prophet's Life, Prophetic Facts, Prophetic Acts. And one of the prophetic acts and facts in that book comes from Ezekiel 24, when the Lord told the prophet that he was going to take his wife, the delight of his eyes, but he should not mourn for her. And it was a prophetic sign regarding Ezekiel not mourning for her. And the Lord took Ezekiel's wife. And he didn't mourn, but he kept on preaching. Your relationship with God has to be such that if that person goes astray, if that person passes away, or whatever the case may be, that it will not deter you from doing God's work. So the person who sent a question yesterday on the 28th, and this question that I saw on the 29th, your relationship with the Lord is first and foremost. When something's ready, the Lord will let you know it's ready. As I saw this question again, I'm reminded of when something is baking. When something's baking in the oven, especially a cake, you don't open the oven door ever so often, or like every 5 minutes, to see if it's ready, or you keep on turning the lights. Usually there's a time associated with it. And especially if you're baking something and you know you cook it at, for example, or you bake it at maybe 3:30 for an hour. If it takes an hour, you don't need to check it 30 minutes in. And even though something may require an hour to bake, you're still going to, in a sense, stick a fork or a toothpick in it to ensure that it's fully baked before you pull it out. And if something was supposed to take an hour and it requires a little bit longer time, you're going to let it bake a little bit longer so that it'll be the best that can be. But when you set the timer will go off, and the Lord will let a person know. And as far as being ready, one of the interesting things about the previous question is that recently I've been seeing a slew of videos talking about people like getting married within 2 months, 3 months, 6 months of first meeting or first start dating. And I'm like, wow, that's fast. And a part of the reason why that happens is not just Christians living by 1 Corinthians 7, where it speaks about it is better to marry than to burn. But a part of that happening where people may get married so fast, so quickly, is because they know that's from God. And for them, there's no point in waiting. And one of the things that will let them know that the other person's ready is that things simply click. Things simply work. So how will you know the other person's ready after you've gotten rejected? Will they return? One of the things to focus on, again, is your relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. Don't worry about how or when or if someone will return. Focus on your relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. And by all means, test the spirits. An interesting thing in the Bible, John the Baptist was speaking about the coming of the Messiah. He pointed Jesus as being the Lamb of God, the one who would take away the sins of the world. At Jesus' baptism, John saw the Spirit of God resting upon Jesus like a dove. He heard the voice from heaven saying, "This is my Son in whom I'm well pleased." But when John was in prison, he sent his men to ask Jesus, "Are you the one to come, or should we expect another?" In a sense, even though John had those signs, those confirmations, he saw those things, he could still take it back to the Lord to ask him, "Are you the one, or should we expect another?" And if a relationship ends or doesn't start, then if you believe it was of God, or that God has someone for you, then you too should be able to take it to the Lord and saying, "Is or was this person the one, or should I expect another?" Because just in case you were deceived, you have to be open to if the Lord is going to communicate something different to you, or if you misunderstood what the Lord communicated. Because sometimes some things from the Lord are clearly stated, but they're not clearly understood. For example, Jesus spoke about destroy this temple and in 3 days rebuild it. As I mentioned, this message was going to be linked to Jesus. Of course, he was speaking about his resurrection, but people thought he was talking about the temple made of stones. 3 days. So do not be afraid to take the relationship back to the Lord. I like to term it as put on the altar. When the Lord directed Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, he put Isaac on the altar, and he was going to sacrifice him as a burnt offering. In a sense, he was willing to walk away from Isaac, even though he told his servants that they would be back. He knew that one way or another, the Lord would resurrect Isaac. It wasn't unto death. Which reminds me of what Jesus said about Lazarus. Lazarus had died, but Jesus said that his sickness was not unto death, and he resurrected him. There's some things the Lord will resurrect. There's some things he will allow to die and remain dead. Your relationship with the Lord has to be such that you're willing to hear from him and accept if he's going to allow something to die and remain dead, or if he's going to allow something to die and resurrect it for his glory. When you're willing to hear from the Lord like that, that means you're willing to hear the truth. It may not take 1 hour, it may not take 1 day, it may take longer. There's evidence in the Bible where, for example, a prophet asked the Lord something, and the prophet may have heard that day. Daniel inquired from the Lord regarding King Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and the Lord answered that night. Jeremiah at one point inquired from the Lord, I think around Jeremiah 42 going on 44. He inquired from the Lord, and it took 10 days for the Lord to give him an answer. Daniel had inquired from the Lord, and it took 21 days plus for him to get an answer. So you can ask the Lord regarding if you're on the right path, if you should wait for this person. Feel free to ask him whatsoever you want. But the most important thing has to be your relationship with him. And as a part of your relationship with him is loving the truth, to the point where if you are deceived, you will hear the truth from the Lord regarding if you're deceived and what course of action to take. Or if you're on the right path, and you could just say it's another test, because I don't like saying setback, but it could be another test along the way for the Lord to deliver what he had promised. But whatever your situation is when it comes to relationships, please ensure that the relationship you focus on is the Lord Jesus Christ. As I say that, a few days ago, I saw this video, and there was a young lady giving a testimony regarding how she met her husband. And she said the Lord communicated to her in a dream, showed her what her husband was going to look like. She saw someone who could have been him, but it wasn't. And she ended up meeting someone who was from another country, who was a guy that she said the Lord showed her in a dream. They got married. They had at least one child. This was like maybe 3 years ago, as at the time of this recording. Then I saw a more recent video about this young lady saying that she is no longer a Christian. Imagine that. Many professing Christians are saying they're waiting on God for a spouse, and they think their life is going to be so much better because they have a spouse. This young lady said she had a dream, the Lord revealing her husband to her. She ended up marrying the man, and apparently she's still happily married. But she says she's no longer Christian, in part because the trials of life got too tough for her, which is one of the things I've been saying for many years will contribute to the great falling away. Many people are not ready to face the battles ahead. So there are many people too focused on relationships with other human beings, thinking that when they get married it'll be the promised land and things will be so much better. But you have to be strong, you have to be courageous, whether you're doing it by yourself or you're doing it with someone else. So I say again, a young lady spoke about the Lord revealing what her husband would look like, her marrying a man who looked like the man she saw in her dream according to her statements, them having a child, and then later on, her saying she's no longer Christian because she went through some trials and they were too difficult for her. So imagine that. So do not lose sight of your most important relationship, which is a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. If the Lord presented someone and it's like his best to that person, and the person rejected the individual who was presented to him or her. Yes, there's some issues. There's also this. We should all guard our hearts. If God wanted two people together, or he gave them opportunity to be together, and he presented one person to the other. And when I say present, it could be him presenting the man to the woman or the woman to the man. In story of Adam and Eve, the Lord presented Eve to Adam. In story of Ruth and Boaz, the Lord presented Ruth to Boaz. So there are different ways the Lord can do it. The Lord even presented Esther to King Ahasuerus, also known as Xerxes. The Lord can also present a man to a woman, but always it's a man who will do the pursuit. So there are different ways the Lord brings two people together. And if one person rejects the other, it's going to cause an issue. And the person who is rejected is going to feel the need to guard his or her heart from the person. Because sometimes one person can reject the other. The other comes to his or her senses. They get into a relationship, but because they don't deal with the rejection, it causes issues later on. So while it may be viewed as being a bad thing, if a person comes to his or her senses and tries approaching the person he or she rejected, yes, there can be some issues. But the person who was rejected and is now doing a rejection, there's some issues that that person has to deal with. Because if God worked on the individual to bring him or her around, and the person is trying to make things right, then the person who's now guarding his or her heart has to work on his or her relationship with the Lord. Because a part of being a Christian is to be Christ-like. And also this pointing to Jesus' resurrection. Peter had denied knowing Jesus. And upon his resurrection, the angel spoke to Mary and told her to get the other apostles and Peter. So even though he had denied knowing Jesus, it's not like Jesus denied knowing Peter. And after his resurrection, a part of Jesus' resurrection was also him, in a sense, resurrecting his relationship with Peter. And when Jesus made his appearance to his disciples, they were in a closed room. And we see this in John 20. Thomas, also known as Didymus, he was not in a room. Peter was there. The Lord didn't especially rebuke Peter for what he had done. There was water in the bridge, so to speak. Now he did rebuke the apostles, the disciples, for the hardness of their hearts. Didn't see that coming. The hardness of their hearts. He rebuked them for the hardness of their hearts, because Mary had told them about Jesus' resurrection, and they didn't initially believe her. So if a person has hardened his or her heart, the Lord knows how to rebuke the person, whether softly or harshly, to cause a change in a person's behavior. But again, all these things are predicated on if the Lord truly ordained the relationship. If he's truly in it, he will make things right. He will do it. So that's John 20. In John 21, when the disciples went to go fishing, this also points to something, because they worked all night and they caught no fish. It was not going to be by their works. Jesus gave them instructions regarding what they needed to do. And when they followed the Lord, they were successful. And then John discerned that it was Jesus on the shore. When Peter heard, Peter just jumped off the boat and he swam towards Jesus. Jesus spoke to Peter, and it's like at that moment you can say he fully restored him by saying, do you love me? Take care of my lambs. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. Do you love me? Feed my sheep. That represented, in a sense, Peter's official restoration. So despite Peter having betrayed Jesus, despite Peter, in a sense, you could say, having hurt Jesus, even though Jesus was prepared for it, the Lord restored him. And that speaks about Jesus. That speaks about God's restorative love. And if a person is called to love you, is going to be Christ-like, then a part of that Christ-likeness is God dealing with the individual, if it is will for the two of you to be together, for him to do it. So those two individuals with a common theme about rejection, ensure that no matter what situation applies to you, that you focus on a relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. Him first and foremost. And then also this. Being married has its benefits regarding fruitfulness for the Lord. But because you're single, it doesn't mean that you can't be a fruit for the Lord. And you should maximize the time while you have it. Because being married, you can say it doesn't change things, it changes everything. And even the amount of time you'll have to spend with the Lord. So with your single season, no matter how rough it is, take time to enjoy it. Not to do anything you're going to regret in your marriage, but take time to enjoy it. And the fruit you can bear for the Lord Jesus Christ. Prayerfully, this answers both questions satisfactorily. I pray this message blesses you. God bless you. And Jesus the Christ is Lord.